the mode of today's spiritual experience, if you want. I'm not making fun of it. My claim is not it's a pseudo-spiritual experience. Of course, I find it disgusting, but my thesis, underlying thesis, is much more radical. It's that what if a spiritual experience itself can be disgusting, even if it's authentic? I mean, why do we automatically associate inner spiritual experience with something, I don't know, morally elevating and so on and so on? My idea was always, for example, when I read, they're horrible reading, of course, Nazi or other memoirs. What if why automatically, if someone does something horrible in real life, organized murder, torture, and so on, why do we automatically assume that he must be somehow non-authentic, hypocritical in his inner life? This is, I know, very sad news, pessimist news. But I'm more and more convinced of it. Now, let me present you, as part of this line of thought, another experience which brought me a lot of hatred in my own country already. I developed this in some of my books, where I propose the line of, like, no ethnic cleansing without poetry. Literally. You know why I took this path? Because I got a little bit tired with this eternal motive which you find from Levinas to Adorno, all of them, or even many generally people of culture, of blaming us philosophers. You know, the idea is political totalitarianism. For example, Emmanuel Levinas said this clearly. Political totalitarianism is grounded in philosophical notion of totality. You think you have access to total, absolute knowledge, you know totality, and this justifies you then to brutally impose your vision on reality. I claim, okay, maybe, although I doubt deeply. Because if you look closely, no, at a naive, empirical level even, if you look closely at most of, not even most of actual so-called totalitarianisms, you will see that the spontaneous ideology of totalitarianism is always historicist relativism, you know. For example, if there was someone who was not philosophically totalitarian, it's Adolf Hitler. Read Mein Kampf. It's a horrible book, pretty boring, but it's worth reading. Because you see that his attitude was not man master of universe. His attitude was man is just a tiny dust of nature. We are totally exposed to nature. We will perish, disappear, and so on. It's total historicist relativism, and so on and so on. So what I'm saying is then, why even I had some problems with even with theorists of deconstruction, who also claim that kind of a metaphysics of identity, sticking to absolute values, again, in some way grounds totalitarianism and so on. Now, look, for example, at the time of the French Revolution, and you will see that the defenders of ancien regime were historicists. They claim we have, you know, their line was the one of, how is he called, the great critic of French Revolution, Edmund Burke, or who? Burke, yeah. You know, the idea is we all live within a certain particular tradition which is ultimately contingent, but the worst thing we can do is to just relativize this tradition which is contingent and impose some eternal values and so on. It was the revolutionaries who were much more metaphysical, in the sense that no, there are natural rights of man. If anything, the conflict between Burke and partisans of French Revolution was a conflict between a historicist and kind of absolutist, no eternal values, natural rights, and so on. Here, I think, it's a nice example of how precisely the reference to an absolute can open up the space of freedom. But let me go on with this idea, ethnic cleansing and so on. Let me be serious now. I'm not crazy. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
I mean, there are poets who really are poets. They are absolute. I mean, but not so many as people think. Like, I don't know, the 20th century, if you mention, I don't know, Paul Celan or whatever. But did you notice, nonetheless, how many of undoubtedly great modernist poets were pretty close to fascism or whatever? Eliot, what is my trauma here? This one. It's very simple line of thought. We are basically half decent people, as I already developed it, I think, the first evening there. And it's difficult for us to kill someone and so on. So you need some kind of absolute mythic, poetic, religious vision, again, to function as a screen, to make it possible. Here I agree, partially, not totally. I'm not part of that today's materialism of Harris and Hitchens and so on. But I basically agree with what Steven Weinberg, I think, said somewhere, that without religion, bad people would be doing bad things and good people good things. You need something like religion to make good people do bad things. I can tell you that this is what happened in my own country, for example. You know the story, ex-Yugoslavia, ethnic cleansing, and so on. I think it's not an accident, a chance that the leader of Bosnian Serbs is Radovan Karadzic, a poet. And I'm not blaming just the Serbs. If you look at other ex-Yugoslav republics, every nation had its own Karadzic. You need this type of vision to enable you to do the horrors. What do I mean by this? It's interesting to read. I always quoted what Heinrich Himmler, you know, the SS boss, he confronted this problem. Like, he knew very well, it's interesting to read him, he knew very well that SS officers and soldiers were obliged to do horrible things while doing, while organizing Holocaust, bringing together all the Jews. You had to beat children, women, and so on and so on. And his problem was how to enable German soldiers or SS, the elite soldiers, to do this without, as he himself put it, Himmler, without becoming beasts, like beasts in the sense of simply enjoying, getting involved in what they are doing. You maybe know what his solution was, Bhagavad Gita, Oriental wisdom. Himmler always had in his pocket a special leather-bound version of Bhagavad Gita. Of course, his focus was, you must know Bhagavad Gita, the famous encounter between Arjuna, the warrior, and God, Krishna, no? Just before the big battle, Arjuna is on the battlefield with tens of thousands of soldiers, opposing army, and has doubts. My God, do I have the right to order the attack? Thousands will die, and so on, all the suffering. And then God basically gives him a nice lesson of this famous act without being fully involved, no? And of this, what we in the West identify, that's another point. Does it really hold or not as Oriental ontology? He says, but material reality are just appearances. Things grow, disintegrate, disappear. The true reality is the reality of your eternal self, Atman, which is eternal. So the logical conclusion, don't worry, do all the killing and so on. What you can destroy is already in itself negligible, deserves to perish, and so on and so on. And precisely, again, don't get involved. And it's really shocking how, if you look, for example, I made a test and looked also at Rwanda. Of course, there is a poet there who for 10 years was laying the ground, the foundation for Tutsis killing the Hutus and so on and so on. I'm not far from condemning poetry. I think that precisely authentic poetry is the best medicine against this. for undermining national myths and so on and so on. But again, I think that precisely, I don't believe in cynicism in the sense of that people can be totally cynical. I claim that nobody can be totally cynical. Each of us has his or her or their own small island of authenticity, as it were, you know. And here again, poetry is needed. You know where poetry enters? Ideological poetry, of course. The most terrifying trick of this poetic justification of violence is a very specific one. Himmler also knew it. They admit, for example, let's go back to that situation that I evoked the first evening here, using you, Matthew, I think, as the example. Let's say I am ordered to kill you. Okay, unfortunately, I'm not perfect. I will have some problems, no? But then the trick is a good totalitarian propaganda, not propaganda, mythology, admits this trouble of mine. Of course, we have, most of us at least, some basic decency. It's disgusting, difficult for us simply to approach another guy, pick out his eyes, cut off his testicles, whatever. But then, you know what does it do, authentic totalitarian poetry? It redefines your very problem with doing this as an ethical problem temptation, in the sense of, as Himmler said, most of the people can do great things for their country, even sacrifice their lives. A true hero is the one who is ready to lose his soul for the country, to do horrible things for his father. So, you know, like, if I have, sorry, don't take it personally, history, if I have to torture and kill you, the trick would have been to say, of course you feel horrible, but the true greatness is to elevate yourself above this temptation of ordinary humanity. Precisely what you, in your everyday awareness, experience as ethically problematic is the weakness. A true hero, a true ethical greatness is when, for a higher cause, you are ready to act beyond good and evil, and so on and so on. And here, you need some poetic vision. I cannot call it otherwise. Vision of, I don't know, national destiny, religion, call it whatever you want, to make them do that. Okay, so again, this would be my first pessimist lesson of how, and at the end I will come to Buddhism again, which I already mentioned, precisely because I think that here, and I spoke with many Buddhists, and even mostly they agree that here there is a problem in Buddhism, namely that the really difficult thing for us to admit is that there is no necessary inner link between ordinary goodness towards others, doing kind things and so on, and let's call it naively authentic spiritual experience. Maybe you know the story, which I like to repeat. I'm sorry if you know it. I wrote about it long ago, 20 years ago, in a book. I wrote about a book which I like very much by Aldous Huxley. Maybe you know it, The Grey Eminence, The Menons Gris. It's a biography of Father Joseph, Père Joseph, who was a priest and the right hand of Cardinal Richelieu, the de facto ruler of France during the 30 Years' War in the early 17th century. You know what is so crazy about this guy? If there ever was an evil politician, it's Father Joseph. To cut a long story short, if we engage in some mythical genealogy and try to guess what's the origin of Hitler, of World War II, it's Father Joseph. You know why? This was the battle between Catholics and Protestants for Europe. But Cardinal Richelieu had no illusions. He knew it's not really about that. It is about guaranteeing about establishing central role of France in European politics, and the way to do it is to prevent German unification. And so, Father Joseph, who executed this plan, did something totally unprincipled. He, although this was officially a war of Catholics against Protestants, he made a pact with Swedish Protestants against Austrian Catholics, just to keep Germany divided. And this is the logic I was referring to. Because Germany was divided, because Germany constituted itself as a nation state too late, everybody knows that this delay caused First World War, and then it's the ultimate cause, and then of Second World War. But then, let's say that, okay, here we have a guy who was at this level really, really evil, organizing murders, extortions, torture, name. Now comes the horrible thing. At the same time, this guy was in a permanent communication, exchanging letters with some nunnery, women's convent, how you call it, and he wrote them the most authentic, beautiful, mystical reflections. At the top level, name it, like who are the big hits, Saint Teresa or John of the Cross, it's at that level. It's absolutely authentic spirituality. And that's what, it's not a really great book, but this is the nice point. This is what bothers so much Aldous Huxley. How can a guy who is doing all this, at the same time, how can he write something that you cannot but say, if you're honest, my God, this is the pearl, the thing itself. This is it. And we can go on here, like Heinrich Heydrich. You know, we are back to Hitler. His second man who organized the Wannsee Conference Holocaust. I was quite traumatized. I read in a history of SS, that Heydrich was, of course, German elite, relatively educated. Privately, he played very well violin, and in the evenings he used to gather with his SS friends, and they had some kind of amateur constituted string quartet, and they liked to play what is, my God, unfortunately I must tell you, is generally admitted one of the top achievements of Western music, late Beethoven's string quartets. Now, I found this to be some kind of, let me call it, ontological scandal, you know. Like, how is this possible? This is not just that, not even scandal, a totally evil man like Heydrich, you know. Again, the one who organized planned Holocaust can maybe authentically enjoy, appreciate such beautiful music. Because here I want to resist the temptation which Huxley was not able to resist. His solution is, this only can mean that Christian or Catholic spirituality is not authentic. He didn't want to admit that you can have it both together. So this is why, as you maybe know, he moved towards the Far East, you know? Meditation, Buddhism, and so on, thinking that his idea was this one, that Christianity is too much focused on suffering, of following the path of Christ, identifying with suffering, that this makes it potentially pathological, while this more peaceful, withdrawn, oriental spiritual attitude can do the job better. But here I have another bad news for you. I always like to mention this book, I hope some of you know it, Brian Victoria, who is himself a Zen Buddhist monk. You really should read this book. It's called Zen at War. It's you can find it, I think it's reprinted all the time. It's widely debated in Zen, in generally Buddhist circles. It's not a big theoretical book. It does something very modest. It looks in detail on how the Japanese Zen community, they were relatively strong, I think around 10 million more, related to Japanese imperial war conquest First war with China, then World War II in the 1930s and 40s. And the result is pretty depressive. Not only they tolerated, but apart from literally 5 or 10 dissidents, they unanimously supported the war. Not even this, but even provided tools, advices to make war more efficient. For example, now I will be really evil. I'm sorry if you already know the story. Do you remember, if you are old enough, some of you are, most happy for you not, in the old hippie times, he was very popular. Who is he? Daisetsu Teitaro Suzuki, D.T. Suzuki, you know, the great Zen popularizer. What people tend to forget, but he was honest enough to admit this, he never denied it, that in the 1930s and 40s, early 40s, he was totally supporting Japanese military imperial politics, and not only this, but even gave active advices about how to render it more efficient. For example, I quote this, I forgot which one, in 2, 3 or 5 books, this wonderful passage from Suzuki, where he says, again, it's the same problem as I mentioned before, like, imagine yourself in battle. You confront your enemy, you see him, and of course, you cannot avoid a minimum of, let's call it personalization, like, you are. Sorry, Matthew, it's always you whom I think. When I think, let's kill a person, I think about you. Don't ask me why. But, like, you know, you are a human being, you have a child, all these problems. Suzuki has an answer here. It's pretty horrifying. He says, these problems remain as long as we remain stuck into this, what Buddhism describes as the samsara, the wheel of desire, false identity, when we perceive falsely ourselves as agent with a substantial self, you know, when we don't fully assume this logic of in Indian anatta, there is no self, just void, and so on. He said that, let's say I have a knife, I want to stab you. If I'm still caught in the world of illusion, I will find it problematic. Like, my God, I am stabbing you, what right do I have to do it? But Suzuki says, imagine that I go through Buddhist enlightenment. Then I really assume that I have no self. I'm just a kind of totally impassive, transparent observer, and the world also, reality, loses its substantial weight and becomes just a dance of phenomena, popping up here, disappearing there. And then he says, if you really assume this existential experience, then it becomes much easier. Suzuki, provides a wonderful description. Says, it's no longer me deciding to stab you. It is, as he says, a knife in my hand as part of a cosmic dance is moving in space, and as part of the same dance, your body hits my knife and I'm for nothing in it, you know, I'm just this totally enlightened observer and so on and so on. Now, let's avoid a misunderstanding. I'm not saying, I have immense respect for Buddhism. I'm not saying, Buddhism, theory of Japanese militarism or whatever that. I'm saying, and Suzuki after the war was heroic enough to admit it. What I'm saying is that it doesn't matter. It's neutral. Suzuki says this wonderfully. People just ignored this when they bought this bullshit, you know. Buddhism, holistic, organic, you are gentle with nature. No, he says Buddhism is a technique of meditation. You can be a fascist, a torturer, a Democrat, a liberal, whatever, communist, it doesn't matter. I found this really radical and great. This is a very traumatic experience. He accepted this irreducible gap. You can have your authentic inner experience. It absolutely doesn't guarantee that you will not be doing horrible things in reality. In some conditions, as Suzuki admits it may even make it easier. Because again, the moment you don't perceive yourself as agent, you are no longer fully identified with it, and so on and so on. So here I have a more general problem about where we are today. Here I have a problem with my personal friend, but we have some theoretical conflicts, Judith Butler. I don't know if I mentioned this. I appreciate her very much, but not the usual books, which are more her. For example, the books that I like by her is her first book, Subjects of Desire, which is, I think, a very good reading of Hegel. That's what I appreciate with her. She's really deep in her heart a Hegelian. And once she told me, Slavo, you must really hate me, I said, no, you may be evil, but you like Hegel. Somebody who wrote such a book on Hegel cannot be totally evil. So then we embraced, we were friends. So, and the other book, The Psychic Life of Power. These are, I think, her best works, not the big official stuff. My problem with her is this one. Her general space, and I don't care here if she really meant it like that. I'm speaking about how she perceived, is that the enemy, quote much, the opponent, is this patriarchal identity, whatever, and then what she's fighting for is to undermine patriarchal identity, essentialism, whatever you want, and to assert that even our most intimate sexual identity is just a result of, you know, the story of these symbolic performative rituals, which also allow then a space of maneuver. When you ironically repeat rituals in a displaced way, you gain a distance, you can undermine them a little bit. My problem here is what? It's not that I'm defending patriarchy identity or what. It's okay, nice, but what is she describing? I claim she's simply describing the predominant ideology today. I don't think our societies today still require this standard patriarchal identity attitude. You know, like each of us has an eternal essential nature or whatever and so on, what she is attacking all the time. I think that
my husband and I are going through IVF treatments now.
Ideology telling us. It's what I like to call this enlightened Western Buddhism, you know. Society is no longer telling us, sacrifice yourself for a higher cause or what. Society is telling us something like, be truly yourself, be authentic, experiment, create yourself. Don't get stuck in one identity. Experiment, reconstruct yourself all the time. And again, all this is spiced with some kind of spontaneous pseudo-Buddhism, where the idea is don't get too attached to it, you know. Don't assume fully any identity. Always play, dance, then you get all this New Age bullshit. Remember, things are not really serious, it's a cosmic dance or whatever you want, and so on and so on. So again, let me go now back. This is the reason I began with Gangnam Style. Because I think that this type of cynical working, where you do something, but you think it redeems you if you do it with irony, with distance. I don't accept this. I claim that, again, as I already said, that precisely ironic distance helps you to swallow it. I mean, this is also part of my personal experience, where I remember when I was young, living in a socialist country, you know, there was one wonderful rumor, which is, of course, wrong for theoretical reasons. But there is a moment of truth in it. All the time, there was a rumor, and then I heard from friends that there was the same rumor in Soviet Union and so on, that, you know, we lived for political jokes. This was the big thing there. And I think if you ask me seriously, I mean it, that the greatest spiritual loss of the fall of communism was the loss of good political jokes. They simply disappeared. They were absolutely sublime, intelligent, wonderful. Even this, I will not bore them with those jokes. But even this, what Freud claims that is a specificity of Central Europe, this wonderful two-level jokes, you know. A joke is told, you think that's it, but then there is another twist. So the rumor was that there is somewhere in secret police or central committee of the party a special secret department where they produce jokes against themselves to keep people satisfied. The idea was, if you provide these, you know, jokes making people this, you know, it doesn't cost anything. You give people this false relaxation, freedom, and so on and so on. I don't think this works for a very simple theoretical reason. Because you know how jokes function. Jokes are, by definition, they're a very mysterious thing. They never have an author. Like, you know, how do you tell a joke? You tell it always by, oh, do you know the joke? I heard the joke. Something in the functioning of a joke prevents you to say, now an idea came me, I just invented the joke. It should be some anonymous. You're always just telling jokes. So again, I think this is wrong, but again, even if it's spontaneous, I think jokes definitely played this role. This role of making it viable, tolerable for you to live in such a society. I'm so attached to this because, you know, in the last years under communism, well, communists were able to read the writing on the wall that their time is over. To enhance their popularity, some communist politicians, it was madness, wonderful, started themselves to tell jokes about themselves. I mean, even Ronald Reagan came close to it, but didn't go to the end in this, I think. I remember a Croat politician visited, it was late 70s, visited Rome, and then come back, and when people expected this kind of official report on friendship between Yugoslav and Italian people, whatever, he started to tell jokes against himself, you know, which were not very funny, but pretty nice. Like, he made fun of himself as stupid and non-educated, you know. The idea was, for example, it plays on, you know, this, in Europe at least, ambiguity of the word chapel. Chapel can mean the church, chapel, and also we call it in Italian cappella, you know, the small band which plays in cafeterias, in restaurants, no? And the guy said, you know, I got lost in Rome. I was told that I should go and see, you know, Michelangelo, Vatican, Sistine Chapel, and I look in all cafeterias and nowhere was Sistine Chapel playing. And then it goes on like, I was then told to go to see Marriage of Figaro. I checked all the churches, nowhere was the Marriage of Figaro announced. And then it goes on, you know, the German city, Baden-Baden, no? This is a standard Koppel's joke, that our politician travels on a train through Germany and says, oh, what city is this? And the guy tells him, Baden-Baden. And he says, I'm not an idiot, you don't have to tell me 2 times or whatever. And so, but again, this is my link with Kung Fu Panda. How you shouldn't be deluded here. This very distance makes it viable. So, okay, back to Gangnam Style, this stupid rhythm, and at the same time, with this stupid rhythm, nonetheless, something like, let's call it, a religious experience. Religious experience kept at a distance, but precisely sustained through this distance. If we pursue this line of thought, I would like to propose, when people ask me, can you think about an authentic religious film of Hollywood? I have an answer. It's not Mel Gibson Passion, which is, I think, as everyone knows, the greatest triumph of sadomaso gay orientation in Hollywood. You know, you have male naked body tortured for 2 hours. What more do you want? It's, did you see it? I really think it's, again,